I remember the first time I saw him, Kieran Walsh. He walked into our open plan office like he'd just discovered the secret to disrupting everything. Navy blazer, Apple Watch gleaming, confidence radiating from his perfectly styled frame, and not a single clue about what we actually built. "Call me Kieran," he said, flashing that MBA smile that screamed consulting firm. "I like things agile, innovative, and user-focused. We're going to revolutionize mobile development, starting now." There was a beat of silence, then the kind of awkward clapping you hear when someone announces layoffs. I stayed quiet, arms crossed. I'd been working on TechFlow's mobile team for 5 years. I'd survived 3 product pivots, 2 major updates, and a complete platform migration. I knew how to navigate these waters. But Kieran? He was about to learn. The first week was chaos. Kieran canceled our regular sprint retrospectives and replaced them with innovation alignment sessions. He disbanded 2 development pods by Thursday, 1 through Slack. Then he started making changes to our flagship app, despite not understanding the codebase architecture. That app, by the way? I built it 3 years ago. After our original app crashed during a major launch, I designed the entire mobile framework from scratch, modular, scalable, cross-platform. And I didn't just code it. I registered the core algorithms and UI components under my name, a protective move encouraged by our previous tech lead who said, "Veronica, if you ever freelance this out, we'll be knocking down your door." It was buried in my independent contractor agreement, just another clause most managers never bother reading. But Kieran hadn't read a thing. By the second week, he started calling me mobile dev instead of my actual title, senior app developer. Small insult, but telling. He avoided eye contact in stand-ups, cut me off mid-explanation, and praised junior developers for solutions I'd already implemented. Classic power play: minimize, marginalize, dismiss. I kept my cool. I always do. But I started screenshotting everything. Then came Friday morning. Kieran strolled into my workspace, leaned against my desk like he was posing for LinkedIn, and said, "Veronica, got a minute?" I gestured toward the empty chair beside me. He didn't sit. "I'm going to be direct," he said in that tone consultants use when they think brutal honesty is leadership. "You've been here a while, maybe gotten too comfortable. We need fresh perspective, and frankly, we need people who think outside conventional paradigms." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning we're discontinuing your project, effective immediately. We've decided to pivot toward mainstream solutions. You'll get your final payment, of course. HR has the details." It was so rehearsed, so condescending, I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and studied him. Really studied him. He had no idea. No idea what I owned. No idea what that copyright clause in my contract meant. No idea that without me, without my explicit written permission, the company couldn't legally continue distributing the app that generated 60% of their revenue. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled. A calm, professional, deliberate smile. "Understood," I said, standing to shake his hand. He didn't take it. Just nodded and turned away like he was already moving on to bigger things. As he walked off, he threw one last comment over his shoulder: "I'm sure you'll find something more suited to your background. Maybe something more niche." My smile didn't falter. "Good luck, Kieran." He paused, probably confused by how unfazed I seemed. Then he left. I packed my things slowly, methodically. A few personal items, a succulent I'd somehow kept alive for 3 years, a backup drive with nothing but team photos from our last hackathon. As I walked through the open workspace, a few heads turned. Some people looked away, uncomfortable. Others gave me small, sympathetic nods. No one said anything. That's how fear spreads in places like this, silently. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking. Not from hurt. From adrenaline. I wasn't devastated. Not yet. I was curious. How long until they realized what they'd just done? I knew the answer: Monday. The weekend passed like a slow brewing storm, quiet, heavy, and charged with electricity. I didn't tell anyone I'd been let go. Not my mom, who always worried I worked too many late nights. Not my college roommate, who would have shown up with Thai takeout and a detailed plan for corporate warfare. And definitely not my ex-boyfriend, who had once said I cared more about code than people. I needed silence. Space. Clarity. Friday night, I went for a long walk through downtown, past the trendy coffee shops and bookstores, letting the cool evening air wash away the sting of dismissal. I wasn't mourning the project. I was mourning the disrespect, the assumption, the idea that someone who had never built anything could walk in, erase years of dedication and innovation, and call it outdated. By Saturday morning, I was ready to dig in. I pulled out my contractor agreement from my personal files. It was all there, in black and white, the copyright registered under my name, the clause reviewed and signed, a carefully worded section that gave me full ownership of the mobile framework I had created. TechFlow had a usage license, one that required my explicit consent for distribution, updates, or modifications. And that license? It was set to expire on Monday. I let out a small laugh. Not because it was amusing, but because the timing was perfect. By 3 p.m., I'd sent an email to TechFlow's compliance department. Not from my old company account, which had already been disabled, but from my personal address. The subject line was straightforward: notice of software license expiration, immediate action required. I kept it professional, direct, no emotions. Just a reminder that per our licensing agreement, the company's right to distribute the app would expire at midnight Sunday unless renegotiated directly with me, the copyright holder. Continued distribution beyond that point would constitute copyright infringement with legal consequences. I signed it clearly, professionally: Veronica Rhodes, developer, TechFlow Mobile Framework version 4.2, copyright registration TX0009847321. I CC'd their compliance officer, our former tech lead, and yes, Kieran. Then I closed my laptop and went for a bike ride. 6 miles through quiet neighborhoods, dodging weekend joggers and dog walkers, feeling the frustration melt away from my shoulders. By Sunday afternoon, my phone had started buzzing. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. 1 voicemail from HR: Veronica, we need to discuss some details about your contract termination. Another from compliance: please contact us immediately to clarify the terms of your development agreement with the company. And finally, late that night, an email from Kieran himself. Subject: urgent license clarification. Veronica, I think there's been some confusion. I'd like to speak with you directly to sort this out before the work week starts. Please call me first thing Monday. Kieran. There it was. The realization. I didn't respond. Let them sweat. Let them come to work Monday morning and discover that their flagship app, the user authentication, the data sync, the payment processing, the entire mobile experience, depended on a license they no longer had. I didn't want payback. I wanted recognition. And if it had to come through frantic emails and emergency meetings, so be it. By the time Monday arrived, I had already been awake for hours. Coffee ready, phone charged, laptop open. I sat on my couch in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, watching the clock tick toward 9 a.m., the official start of TechFlow's workday. At 9:12, my inbox lit up. App Store showing violation warning. Urgent. Users reporting login failures. Veronica, call me immediately. From Kieran. Then came a text from Becca, my former teammate now at a different startup. Becca, tell me you're behind the TechFlow meltdown. Kieran's having a complete breakdown. App's been pulled from stores. Emergency all hands called. This is legendary. I smiled. Not from spite. From validation. This wasn't destruction. This was what happened when managers made assumptions about ownership and dismissed creators without understanding what they'd built. At 9:28, my phone rang. This time, I picked up. Veronica. Kieran's voice was strained through the speaker, fake composure barely covering raw panic. "We need to resolve this immediately." I had no idea about the licensing situation. "Let's get you back in here, Anne." I interrupted gently. "I'm happy to discuss this, Kieran. But not about employment. We're talking licensing now, as independent parties." Silence. "Veronica," he said again, voice tighter, "let's not overcomplicate this." "Oh," I replied, "it's not complicated. It's copyright law." Then I hung up. And just like that, the real conversation began. I walked into the TechFlow building at 10:15 a.m. on Monday morning. Not through the side developer entrance, but through the main lobby. My sneakers squeaked against the polished concrete floor, each step deliberate and confident, the sound strange to me after years of quietly slipping in with my backpack and coffee tumbler. This wasn't a return. It was a reckoning. The front desk coordinator blinked when she saw me. "Veronica?" I smiled. "I have a meeting with compliance." She nodded quickly, obviously confused about what was happening, and reached for her phone. Her fingers hesitated slightly as she dialed. I could sense the atmosphere in the lobby change, the way conversations paused, the sideways glances from employees trying not to stare. "Take the elevator to the 4th floor," she said. "They're expecting you." As I stepped in and the doors slid shut, I caught my reflection in the brushed steel panel. Composed, steady. But underneath, my pulse was racing. Not with anxiety. With determination. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this moment. Not just to protect my code, but to establish my worth. When I entered the compliance conference room, the atmosphere was tense. The company's compliance officer stood up to greet me, followed by 2 HR representatives and a legal consultant I recognized from our software audit last year. Kieran was nowhere to be seen. I took a seat at the head of the table. "Let them approach me." "Veronica," the compliance officer began, his voice carefully neutral, "thank you for coming in. We want to address this situation and find a mutually beneficial solution." "Absolutely," I replied. "I'm all for fair resolutions." "I assume you've reviewed the copyright agreement?" He nodded. "We have. Your claims are legitimate. The mobile framework is registered under your name, and according to the agreement, continued distribution without your authorization constitutes infringement. And the license expired at midnight, as you stated." There was a pause. Then he leaned forward. "We'd like to propose extending the existing license retroactively. Same terms, same duration, full app functionality restored." I smiled. "That's not going to work for me." A nervous energy swept around the room. The legal consultant made notes on her tablet. "I'm not here to restore the old arrangement," I continued steadily. "I'm here to negotiate properly. You're currently facing distribution issues, correct?" They exchanged glances. "We've been informed it's affecting App Store availability, user authentication, and core functionality." The compliance officer finally nodded. "Yes." "Then let's discuss terms," I said. "I want $800,000 for the next 12 months. Exclusive licensing, renewable quarterly, full framework support through me directly or a development team I approve, and public credit for the mobile architecture in your company documentation." It wasn't a gamble. It was a fair market rate based on the app's user base and revenue impact. The silence in the room told me they hadn't expected me to walk in this prepared. "Not like this." One of the HR representatives cleared her throat. "That's a substantial increase. It reflects actual value. Something this company seems to have trouble recognizing." The compliance officer sat back in his chair. "We'll need to escalate this to the regional director." "I'll wait," I said simply. "But just so you know, every hour of delay impacts user experience, your App Store ratings, your market position. I'd suggest moving fast." They didn't disagree. At 11:20 a.m., as I waited outside the conference room with a water bottle and my phone face down, I saw Kieran pacing near the open workspace. He hadn't noticed me yet. When he finally did, his expression went blank. Then it changed. First to disbelief, then to something else. Realization. He walked toward me, his pace more measured than usual, calculated. "Veronica," he said, his voice strained into politeness. "I didn't think you'd show up in person." "No, Kieran," I replied steadily. "You didn't think about a lot of things." "I think this has escalated unnecessarily," he began, hands clasped behind his back, attempting casual authority. "We should have discussed this before involving compliance." "You mean before you terminated my project?" I raised an eyebrow. "That decision was made with limited context." "No," I said, standing. "That decision was made with arrogance. And now you're facing the results." He started to speak again, but I didn't let him. "I'm not upset, Kieran. I'm just finished being overlooked. I've documented everything, the copyright, the licensing terms, and your dismissal without proper review. I'm not here to debate. I'm here to negotiate. If you want to save this situation, and possibly your position, you'll let compliance handle their job." His expression tightened. I walked past him, back toward the meeting room. "Oh, and Kieran," I said, glancing back, "good luck." That word again. Luck. Something I never relied on. By noon, the conference room was packed again. Only this time, the energy was different. More intense, more urgent. The regional director hadn't joined, but I could feel their influence behind every word the compliance team spoke. The stakes had shifted. What was once a project termination was now a copyright crisis with user impact and revenue implications. I didn't waver. The compliance officer sat directly across from me. He looked less composed than earlier. Collar unbuttoned, forehead creased. "We've considered your proposal," he began, speaking carefully. "And while we find the terms demanding." "Fair," I corrected. He paused, nodded. "Fair. We're willing to accept the licensing fee, with one modification. 3-month contract, renewable quarterly as you suggested. Public acknowledgement, we'd prefer to word it as development partnership rather than full copyright attribution." I leaned forward. "No." His eyebrows raised. "I'm sorry?" "I want it stated explicitly and publicly, mobile framework designed and copyrighted by Veronica Rhodes. No corporate speak, no watered-down language. This company has benefited from my framework for 3 years, and everyone here knows it. I'm not disappearing quietly so Kieran can pretend this never happened." The room went quiet. The HR representative glanced at her notes but stayed silent. The legal consultant typed furiously. The compliance officer adjusted his glasses. "We'll need to run this by the regional director." "Please do," I said, gathering my folder. "And while you're at it, I'd recommend transparency. App Store violations due to copyright disputes don't look good to investors or users." That hit its mark. Because that's the reality no one wants to face publicly, how a single licensing dispute, especially involving core functionality, can tank user ratings, trigger platform penalties, or worse, result in permanent app removal. I understood their pressure points better than they realized. And now I had leverage. As I walked out into the hallway, I spotted Becca again, this time by the coffee station. She gave me a look, half amazement, half respect. "They're calling you the code queen in our Slack," she said with a smirk. I smiled slightly. "Better than being called outdated." She laughed, then dropped her voice. "Word is spreading, Veronica. Kieran's in damage control mode, telling the regional director this was all a communication breakdown, claiming you never properly documented the copyright terms." "That's false," I said calmly. "But let him spin. Facts don't need embellishment." Becca moved closer. "Everyone saw the email you sent to compliance before the deadline. Screenshots are everywhere. The junior devs are talking about it like it's tech folklore." I didn't respond immediately. My thoughts were already shifting to the next phase. Because regaining control wasn't enough. I wanted recognition. The next morning, I sent a follow-up email. Not to compliance, not to Kieran, but directly to the regional director, using the contact I'd saved from a cross-team project we'd collaborated on last year. The subject line was straightforward: Mobile Framework Licensing, Public Credit, and Management Practices. I kept it professional, direct, and factual. I outlined the scope of the copyright and its critical importance to app functionality, the project termination and licensing conflict timeline, Kieran's decision to dismiss a key developer without reviewing intellectual property obligations, and the misleading story he was now spreading. I closed with a pointed question: if this is how he handles internal talent and assets, how do you expect him to manage client relationships, vendor partnerships, or platform compliance? By that afternoon, the response arrived. Not from the director, but from a senior operations manager. Veronica, thank you for your detailed and professional communication. Please know that we take this matter seriously. We'll be conducting an internal review with all the documentation you've provided. In the meantime, we support the licensing agreement and expect it to be finalized within 24 hours under the terms you've outlined. We apologize that the department's leadership did not properly value your contributions. I stared at the message for a moment, then sat back in my chair. It wasn't a full admission, but it was recognition. Not just of the situation, but of the power shift. Later that evening, I got a text from Becca again. Becca, Kieran's in full panic mode. Emergency leadership meeting tomorrow morning. His boss flew in from Seattle. Word is he's been making frantic calls all day, trying to spin this. I typed back carefully: let him scramble. I have facts and documentation that speak for themselves. Tomorrow would be more than a licensing negotiation. It would be a reset. The leadership team met at 8:30 a.m. sharp on Wednesday morning. By 8:47, I was included. Not by Kieran, not by compliance, but by the regional director herself. The email was brief, but the message was clear: please join us for a private session at 10:30. Your expertise will be essential to our discussion. That word again. Essential. Last week, I was outdated. Now I was essential. The contrast would have been amusing if it weren't so telling. At 10:25 a.m., I entered the executive conference room on the 5th floor of the TechFlow building. A space I'd only been in once before, 2 years ago, when demonstrating the mobile framework prototype to senior leadership. Back then, I presented from the side of the room, barely acknowledged. Today, I walked directly to the seat prepared for me. No uncertainty. Kieran was already there, sitting across the table, arms folded, tablet positioned like a shield he couldn't use. His shirt was crisp, his expression controlled, but the tension in his shoulders? That was genuine. The regional director opened with standard protocol, then addressed me. Veronica, thank you for joining us. We've examined the licensing terms and your documentation. We'd appreciate your perspective before we proceed. I nodded. Absolutely. I stood, set aside my notes, but didn't reference them. Instead, I made eye contact with each person at the table and said, management isn't about authority. It's about understanding. About recognizing the systems that drive your products, both technical and human. When a new manager inherits something they don't comprehend, they have two options: learn or demolish. Kieran chose demolition. Kieran tensed but remained silent. He dismissed my work as outdated, terminated my project without proper evaluation, then overlooked the legal realities of the intellectual property that powers this app. Worse, he only acknowledged the problem after the crisis hit, after users were affected and app stores issued warnings. I let that settle. Everything I created, every line of code I wrote, was designed to strengthen this product. But no framework can protect against poor judgment. And if your management doesn't understand the foundation of your technology or the value of the people who built it, you're not just risking legal issues, you're risking your entire platform. Silence. Then one of the senior managers leaned forward. What would you do in his position? I smiled slightly. I wouldn't take his position. I'd work alongside someone who understands development, user experience, and compliance. I'd create a management approach that prioritizes collaboration over hierarchy. And I wouldn't wait for a copyright crisis to start respecting the developers who maintain your systems. There was a pause. Then the director cleared her throat. Thank you, Veronica. Please wait outside while we discuss this. I stood, acknowledged each of them, and stepped out. 15 minutes later, I heard intense voices through the conference room door. Not mine. Kieran's. He was scrambling, deflecting, blaming compliance, the previous tech lead, and even the legal consultant. That was his final strategy: distribute responsibility until it disappeared. But this time, it failed. At 11:52 a.m., the regional director emerged. Veronica, we've finished our discussion. We'd like to speak with you again, privately. I followed her back inside. This time, Kieran was absent. The director sat down and clasped her hands on the table. Effective immediately, she said, Kieran Walsh has been placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive review. We'll be releasing an updated statement to the team, clarifying the situation and publicly crediting your contribution to TechFlow's mobile platform and recovery. She handed me a printed draft of the announcement. I read the opening line aloud. We recognize Veronica Rhodes's innovation, expertise, and intellectual property as fundamental to TechFlow's mobile success. It affected me more than I anticipated. Not because I craved the validation, but because I understood how many developers, especially women of color, never receive this recognition. How would you like to move forward? The director asked. I've already outlined the licensing terms, I said. But I'd also like to propose consulting. Short-term engagement, no permanent return. I want independence, and I want to help establish safeguards so this situation doesn't happen to other developers. She nodded. We'll make it happen. I stood, and as I prepared to leave, she added, Veronica? Yes. You didn't just save your framework. You protected our entire mobile strategy. I gave a quiet nod. I understand. As I left the conference room, the pressure that had built up over the past week began to ease. Not instantly, but gradually, like shedding layers I no longer needed. In the hallway, Becca was waiting. He's out, she whispered. I smiled. On leave, for now. And you? I glanced toward the open workspace where I used to code alongside the team. I'm just beginning. The company-wide announcement went live at 1:45 p.m. on Friday. Effective immediately, Kieran Walsh has been placed on administrative leave pending a thorough review of recent departmental decisions, including project management and contractor relations. TechFlow formally acknowledges Veronica Rhodes as the creator of our mobile framework architecture. Her copyright and licensing terms are now officially part of our development agreements. We appreciate her continued collaboration and leadership during this transition. The message was concise, but within the company, it resonated powerfully. By the time I left the building that day, the awkward silence in the workspace had transformed into genuine smiles, confident nods, and quiet well done comments from colleagues who hadn't spoken to me in days. It wasn't the revenge I had wanted. It was respect. And more importantly, it was a change. The following Monday, I met with compliance again. This time, not for crisis management, but to suggest a new protocol, a system that would protect developer innovations and prevent management overreach. It included mandatory IP reviews during leadership changes, confidential reporting channels connected directly to senior operations, a mentorship program for junior developers focused on intellectual property rights, credit attribution, and professional boundaries. I didn't want to simply win this battle. I wanted to leave a lasting impact. Within a week, the consulting contract was completed. I would work for 60 days, helping stabilize the mobile platform post-crisis and training the next lead developer to take ownership. My conditions, my schedule. People kept asking if I'd consider returning permanently. The answer was consistently no. Even though I valued the technology, the company had evolved. And so had I. One afternoon, 2 weeks into my consulting arrangement, I stood outside the building after a long strategy session and noticed a group of junior developers walking by. One of them, a young woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a shy smile, stopped when she saw me. "Are you Veronica Rhodes?" she asked. I nodded. Her eyes brightened. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it's already become a legend around here. We discuss it constantly in our team chats. You showed us that it's okay to stand up for our work." I smiled warmly. "Then keep standing up," I said. "Don't wait for someone else's approval." She nodded enthusiastically and hurried to catch up with her group, leaving me with an unexpected feeling. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something more profound. Impact. That weekend, I finally let myself relax. I drove to the coast, turned off my phone, and watched the waves crash against the rocks. For the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't cycling through contracts or strategies. Just stillness. Clarity. That evening, I opened a notebook for the first time since this whole situation began. One sentence jumped out as I wrote: I was never demanding control. I was demanding respect. And when they couldn't offer that, I built my own platform instead of waiting for an invitation to theirs. In the weeks that followed, updates filtered through. Kieran's leave became a permanent departure. The official statement mentioned strategic realignment needs. There were rumors about other complaints, other developers who'd been dismissed or overlooked before me. The company's atmosphere began to evolve. Gradually, but noticeably. Exit processes were being redesigned. Staff training now includes intellectual property education. And for the first time, developer credit was formally integrated into project documentation. Some managers attempted to revise the narrative. "Veronica was always a valued team member," one said during a company presentation. "We've consistently recognized her contributions." I didn't challenge them. I didn't need to. The people who understood knew the reality. So did the code. The framework I created still powered their platform, and my name was finally where it belonged, in the documentation, in the credits, and in the company's history. Months later, I received a handwritten note from the regional director. "Veronica, you transformed how we approach developer relations, not through confrontation, but through conviction. Thank you for demonstrating what genuine leadership looks like. Sarah." I kept it in the same folder where I'd once saved my termination notice. A reminder of where I'd begun and where I refused to remain. Today, I run my own development consultancy. I work with companies that want more than trendy management, they want robust systems and empowered teams. I select my projects thoughtfully. I establish clear boundaries. And I never sign anything without examining every clause. Because ultimately, this story wasn't about payback. It was about worth, recognition, and the calm, persistent strength of someone who refused to vanish when others tried to erase her contributions. So, to anyone out there who's ever been undervalued, dismissed, or called difficult for simply understanding your value, here's what I've learned: you don't need to be loud to create change. You just need to know your worth and never surrender that knowledge to someone who doesn't see it. Because when they terminate, you think they've silenced you, all they've really done is ignite your determination.